The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people looked up at the night sky and wondered what was out there. They dreamed of touching those distant lights. They built rockets and satellites and space stations. They sent probes to other planets and moons. And finally, in 2047, they built their first ship capable of traveling to another star. That was when everything changed. The ship never reached its destination. 3 days into its journey, it encountered something that should not have existed. A wall of shimmering energy appeared in front of it, stretching in every direction as far as sensors could detect. When the ship tried to pass through, it simply stopped. Every system shut down. The crew drifted for 6 hours before backup power came online and they could return home. Humanity tried again and again. Different ships, different routes, different technologies. The result was always the same. Something had built a cage around the entire solar system, and humanity was trapped inside. It took another year before they learned who had done this. A message arrived from beyond the barrier, translated into every human language simultaneously. The message came from something called the Concordat of 12, an alliance of the 12 oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. They had been watching Earth for centuries. They had studied human history, human biology, human behavior. And they had decided that humanity was too dangerous to be free. The message explained that humans were classified as a predator remnant species. Their ancestors had been pursuit hunters, chasing prey across endless plains until it collapsed from exhaustion. This had shaped human bodies and minds in ways that made them fundamentally violent. Humans formed tight social groups and viewed outsiders with suspicion. They were territorial and aggressive. They had spent most of their history killing each other in increasingly efficient ways. The Concordat had encountered species like this before. They always caused problems. They started wars. They conquered and destroyed. Some of them grew powerful enough to threaten entire regions of space before they were stopped. The containment field was a mercy, the message explained. Many members of the Concordat had voted to simply destroy Earth and be done with it. The barrier was a compromise. Humanity could live out its existence in its own solar system, safely separated from the civilizations it might otherwise harm. The message ended with a warning. Any attempt to breach the barrier would result in immediate and permanent consequences. Humanity should accept its situation and make peace with it. Humanity did not make peace with it. Admiral Wei was born 150 years after the barrier went up. By that time, the anger and despair of the first generations had transformed into something colder and more patient. Every child learned about the Concordat in school. Every child learned that aliens had decided humanity was too dangerous to exist freely. Every child grew up knowing that their species had been judged and found wanting. This knowledge did something to people. It united them in a way nothing else ever had. Old conflicts between nations seemed pointless when the entire species had been condemned together. Old rivalries faded when everyone shared the same enemy. Humanity stopped fighting itself and started preparing for something else. Joined the United Earth Fleet when she was 18 years old. By the time she was 40, she commanded a carrier group. By 60, she was an admiral. By 80, thanks to the life extension technologies that 3 centuries of focused research had produced, she was named Supreme Commander of all human military forces. On the day she took command, she stood on the observation deck of Prometheus Station and looked out at what her species had built. Ships filled the void in every direction, massive dreadnoughts bristling with weapons, sleek carriers holding thousands of fighters, heavy cruisers and light frigates and countless support vessels. They stretched beyond what the eye could see, rank upon rank of military might that had taken 300 years to assemble. Her aide stood beside her, a young man named Thomas who reminded her of herself at that age, eager, angry, patient. "Final count is in," Thomas said. 550,000 combat-ready vessels. The last carrier group finished assembly this morning. Nodded slowly. She had known the number for months, but hearing it spoken aloud still sent a chill through her. 500,000 warships. Every human alive had contributed something to this fleet. Factory workers had built the hulls. Scientists had designed the weapons. Farmers had grown the food that fed the workers and scientists. Children had collected scrap metal for recycling. Old people had told stories to keep the anger alive. This armada was not just a military force. It was the physical form of 3 centuries of patient rage. "And the barrier breakers?" asked. Thomas smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. The physics division confirmed it this morning. They have cracked the barrier technology. The Concordat built their cage using principles they assumed we would never understand. They thought we were too primitive, too violent, too stupid to figure it out. They assumed wrong. Yes, ma'am, they assumed very wrong. Turned away from the viewport and walked toward the tactical center. Screens covered every wall, showing the positions of every ship in the fleet. Green dots representing human vessels filled the display like stars in the sky. "What do we know about the Concordat now?" she asked. Thomas followed her, pulling up information on a tablet. "Their monitoring stations around our system are automated. They stopped sending actual observers about a century ago. They check in occasionally, but they have grown comfortable. They think we are still trapped and helpless." "Have they noticed our communications blackout?" "Our intelligence suggests they have not. We went silent 6 months ago, and there has been no increased activity from their monitoring stations. They are not paying attention." Allowed herself a small smile. For 300 years, humanity had chattered across every electromagnetic frequency. Radio, television, internet traffic, military communications. The Concordat had listened to all of it. They had analyzed human culture and confirmed their beliefs about human nature. They had grown confident that they understood their prisoners. 6 months ago, every human transmission had stopped. The species that never shut up had suddenly gone completely quiet. If the Concordat had been paying attention, this might have worried them. But they were not paying attention. They had moved on to other concerns. The quarantined species was contained and would eventually die out. There were more important matters to deal with. Reached the central command console and placed her hands on its surface. 300 years of waiting. 300 years of building. 300 years of teaching each new generation to remember what had been done to them and to prepare for the day when they could respond. That day had finally arrived. "Send the signal to all fleet commanders," she said. "Begin final preparations. In 72 hours we move." Thomas nodded and began transmitting orders. Around them, Prometheus Station hummed with activity as thousands of crew members rushed to their posts. Looked up at the ceiling, as if she could see through it to the barrier that had imprisoned her species for so long. The Concordat thought they knew what humanity was. They thought they had seen the worst that humans could do. They had no idea. In 3 days, the galaxy would learn what happened when you locked humanity in a cage and gave them 3 centuries to prepare. They would learn that humans were patient. They would learn that humans held grudges. And they would learn that humans, when they finally decided to act, did so with a fury that made their violent history look like a pleasant disagreement. The Concordat had created this moment. They had taken a young species that might have grown into a peaceful member of galactic civilization and turned them into something else entirely. They had taught humanity to hate. They had given humanity a target for that hate. Now they would see the results of their decision. Admiral Way closed her eyes and allowed herself one moment of anticipation. Then she opened them and got back to work. There was a galaxy waiting to be silenced. The barrier had stood for 300 years. It surrounded the entire solar system like a soap bubble, invisible to human eyes but absolutely solid to any ship that tried to pass through. The Concordat had built it using technologies that were ancient before humanity discovered fire. They considered it unbreakable. They were wrong. Admiral Way stood on the bridge of the Defiance, the largest warship humanity had ever built. It was 5 kilometers long and carried enough weapons to destroy a small moon. But the Defiance was not the key to what was about to happen. That honor belonged to the 12 barrier breaker vessels positioned around the edge of the solar system. The barrier breakers looked strange compared to the rest of the fleet. They were all angles and curves, covered in devices that glowed with soft blue light. Each one had taken 50 years to build and represented the combined knowledge of humanity's greatest scientists. They had studied the barrier for centuries, poking and prodding it, running millions of experiments, slowly learning its secrets. The barrier worked by creating a resonance field that disrupted any matter passing through it. It was elegant and simple, and based on principles that the Concordat believed were beyond human understanding. They had underestimated how stubborn humans could be when motivated by rage. "All barrier breakers report ready," Thomas announced from his station. "Targeting solutions confirmed, power levels optimal." Looked at the main. She could not see the barrier from here, but she knew exactly where it was. Every human did. It was the wall that separated them from the rest of existence, the reminder of what had been done to them. Status of the fleet. All 550,000 vessels in position. Fighter wings prepped for launch. All crew members at battle stations. Nodded. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency. There was no nervous chatter, no excited whispers. They had trained for this moment their entire lives. Their parents had trained for it. Their grandparents had trained for it. 8 generations of humanity had worked toward this single point in time. "Open a channel to all ships," ordered. The communications officer nodded. "Channel open, Admiral." Took a deep breath. Somewhere out there, millions of her people waited for her words. Soldiers and pilots and engineers and medics. Human beings who had never known a life without the barrier, who had never seen the stars up close, who had spent their whole existence preparing for this moment. "This is Admiral Way," she said. "In a few minutes, we will do something that the Concordat believed impossible. We will break their barrier. We will tear down the wall they built around us. And we will show the galaxy what they created when they decided to cage humanity." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Remember what they called us. They said we were predators. They said we were too violent to be free. They looked at our history and saw only the wars, only the blood, only the death. They did not see the courage that let us keep fighting even when we were outmatched. They did not see the loyalty that made us die for our friends and families. They did not see the stubbornness that made us refuse to give up no matter how bad things got." Felt a cold fire burning in her chest. 300 years of waiting had concentrated human anger into something pure and powerful. They thought they knew us. They were wrong. Today we prove them right about one thing. We are dangerous. We are the most dangerous thing this galaxy has ever seen. Not because we are violent, but because we are patient, because we remember, because we never ever forgive. She looked around the bridge at the faces of her crew. They stared back at her with eyes that held the same cold fire. "All ships prepare for barrier breach, and may whatever gods the Concordat pray to have mercy on them, because we will not." She cut the channel and turned to Thomas. "Fire the barrier breakers." Thomas relayed the order. On the 12 specialized vessels began to glow brighter and brighter. The energy they were gathering was immense, enough to power entire planets for centuries, all of it focused on a single task. The barrier breakers fired simultaneously. 12 beams of pure white energy lanced out into the darkness, striking the invisible barrier at precisely calculated points. The Concordat had designed their containment field to resist any direct attack, but they had not designed it to resist this. The beams were synchronized perfectly, creating a harmonic resonance that turned the barrier's own energy against itself. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the barrier began to shimmer. It became visible for the first time, a wall of shifting colors that stretched across the solar system. The shimmer spread, growing more violent, more unstable. Cracks of pure light appeared in the barrier's surface. And then, with a flash that lit up the entire solar system, the barrier simply ceased to exist. 300 years of imprisonment ended in a single moment. Felt tears on her cheeks. She had not expected to cry, but she could not stop herself. All around the bridge, other crew members were crying too. Some laughed, some shouted. One young ensign fell to his knees and stared at them in disbelief. The stars were open. For the first time in 3 centuries, humanity could reach them. "Fleet status," said, her voice steady despite her tears. Thomas checked his console. "All ships report ready, Admiral. The breach is stable and expanding. We have a clear path into Concordat space." Wiped her eyes and straightened her uniform. The time for tears was over. The time for action had come. "All ships forward," she commanded. "Maximum speed." 550,000 vessels began to move. They poured through the gap in the barrier like water rushing through a broken dam. Dreadnoughts and carriers and cruisers and frigates, spreading out into formations that had been practiced 10,000 times. The largest military force in galactic history moved with perfect coordination, each ship knowing exactly where it needed to be. The first Concordat monitoring station detected them 6 hours later. It was a small automated outpost, designed to watch for any signs of barrier breach and report back to the Concordat Council. Its sensors registered the impossible reading and immediately transmitted an emergency alert. The station operator on the receiving end was unnamed. He had worked this job for 30 years and had never received an actual alert. The quarantined species was contained. Everyone knew that. The alert was probably just a malfunction. He checked the data anyway. Stared at his screen for a long time. The numbers could not be real. 500,000 ships. That was more than the entire Concordat military combined. It was more ships than some species had built in their entire history. He enhanced the sensor data, looking for some explanation. A glitch, a reflection, anything that would make the readings make sense. Instead, he got a clear image of the human fleet, rank upon rank of warships, moving through space with terrible purpose. The containment field was gone. The quarantined species was free. Sent the alert to the Concordat Council with trembling hands. Then he transmitted one additional message, his own words added to the official report. "They're free. Gods of the void, they're all free." He did not know it, but those would be the last words the galaxy heard from the monitoring station. 1 hour later, a human destroyer arrived and destroyed the outpost with a single shot. No warning, no communication, just swift and silent destruction. Admiral received the report and nodded with satisfaction. The first strike had been clean and efficient. No survivors meant no detailed information reaching the Concordat about human capabilities. "Continue on course," she ordered. "Maintain communications blackout. No ship is to respond to any Concordat transmissions." The fleet moved deeper into enemy territory. Behind them, the gap in the barrier continued to expand as more barrier breakers did their work. Soon, the entire containment field would be gone, erased from existence as if it had never been. The Concordat had spent 3 centuries ignoring humanity. They had assumed the quarantined species would die out eventually, as such species always did. They had moved on to other concerns and forgotten about the violent primates locked away in an unimportant corner of the galaxy. Now those forgotten primates were coming for them, and they were bringing 500,000 warships with them. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you underestimated humanity. Looked at the stars spreading out before her fleet and smiled. It was not a warm expression. It was the smile of a predator who had finally been released from her cage. The hunt had begun. 6 months had passed since the barrier fell. In that time, the galaxy had learned a new kind of fear. The Concordat had expected many things when they first received word that humanity was free. They expected rage. They expected demands. They expected threats and ultimatums and the violent outbursts that predator species were known for. They prepared their diplomats with carefully crafted apologies. They assembled their military forces into defensive positions. They waited for the inevitable first contact, ready to negotiate from a position of strength. The contact never came. Human ships appeared in Concordat space like ghosts. One day a system would be normal. The next day a human fleet would be there. They did not announce themselves. They did not respond to hails. They simply arrived, silent and deadly, and did whatever they had come to do. Military installations were their first targets. Concordat bases that had stood for thousands of years found themselves surrounded by human warships. The humans would broadcast a single message: power down all weapons, evacuate all personnel, you have 1 hour. That was all. No explanation, no negotiation, just a simple demand and a deadline. Most commanders obeyed. They had seen what happened to those who did not. 3 military stations had tried to fight back in the first week. All 3 were destroyed in minutes, their debris scattered across space as a warning to others. The survivors spoke of the silence. Human ships did not taunt their enemies. They did not celebrate their victories. They simply acted with cold efficiency and moved on to the next target. It was more disturbing than any display of anger would have been. Ambassador Eth of the species was one of the few non-humans who had actually spoken with a human during these 6 months. The encounter had haunted him ever since. He had been aboard a diplomatic vessel that was intercepted by a human destroyer. Eth had prepared a long speech about cooperation and understanding. He had practiced it for hours, choosing each word carefully. The human captain had listened without expression. When Eth finished, the captain had said only 5 words: "We have nothing to say." Then the destroyer had released the diplomatic vessel and moved on. No threats, no demands, just dismissal. Eth now stood before the Concordat Council, trying to explain what he had learned. The 12 representatives of the elder species looked at him with varying degrees of fear and confusion. "They are not talking to us," Eth said. "In 300 years of isolation they learned they had nothing to say to us. We condemned them. We imprisoned them. We expected them to die. And now they do not consider us worth speaking to." The representative leaned forward. "But surely they want something: territory, resources, revenge." Eth shook his head. "If they wanted revenge, they would have bombarded our worlds from orbit. They have not. They have killed only military personnel who resisted. Civilian populations have been left alone. They are not acting out of rage." "Then what do they want?" demanded the representative, his 4 arms waving with agitation. "I believe," Eth said slowly, "that they want us to understand what we did. They want us to feel what they felt. They were silenced for 3 centuries. Now they are silencing us." The council chamber fell quiet. Outside the great windows, the lights of Concordat Prime twinkled in the eternal night. This world had been the center of galactic civilization for 50,000 years. Its spires reached toward the stars. Its population numbered in the billions. And in orbit above it, held just out of visual range, was the largest human fleet ever assembled. Admiral Way had brought her entire armada to Concordat Prime. 550,000 ships hung in the darkness like patient predators, waiting for something that only they understood. "They have made no demands?" the council chair asked. "None," Eth confirmed. "They simply arrived and took position. They have been there for 42 days. They do not respond to any communication. They simply wait." The chair, an ancient being called En who had led the council for 600 years, made a sound that might have been a sigh. "Then we wait as well. We have no other choice." On the Defiance, Admiral watched the planet below with cold satisfaction. She knew the Concordat was terrified. She knew they were desperate to negotiate, to apologize, to do anything that might end this silent siege. The communications logs showed their increasingly frantic attempts to make contact. She ignored them all. "Admiral," Thomas said, "our intelligence reports that several council members are advocating for surrender. They want to offer us anything we want." Nodded without looking away from the viewport. "Let them talk, let them argue, let them feel helpless. Some of our commanders are getting restless. They want to know when we will act." Now turned to face her aide. "We will act when I decide to act, not before. The Concordat spent 300 years making us wait. I think 42 days is a reasonable down payment on what they owe us." Thomas nodded and returned to his duties. He understood, as all humans did, the purpose of this waiting. It was not cruelty. It was education. The Concordat had treated humanity like animals. They had locked them away and forgotten about them. They had assumed that their advanced technology and ancient wisdom made them superior. Now humanity was showing them what it felt like to be helpless, to have your fate decided by someone who would not even speak to you, to wait and wonder and fear. Around Concordat Prime, human ships maintained their silent vigil. They did not move. They did not communicate. They simply existed, a constant reminder of the power that humanity had gathered. Other human fleets were doing similar things across the galaxy. Every major Concordat world now had human ships in orbit. Every trade route was watched. Every military base was either occupied or destroyed. The Concordat's power, which had seemed so overwhelming just 6 months ago, had evaporated like morning mist. Their fleets were outmatched. Their technology, while advanced, was not advanced enough. Their diplomatic skills were useless against an enemy who refused to talk. They had created a monster by trying to prevent one. They had taught humanity to hate, to prepare, to wait. And now that lesson was being turned against them. In the depths of space, far from any world, a Concordat transport ship drifted with its engines cold. Its captain had ordered a complete shutdown when human ships appeared on the sensors. Maybe, he thought, they would be overlooked if they played dead. The human destroyer that found them did not fire. Instead, it came alongside the transport and matched its drift perfectly. For 3 hours, the destroyer sat there, doing nothing. The transport crew watched their sensors with growing terror. Then, without any communication, the destroyer turned and left. The transport captain did not understand what had just happened, but he would never forget the feeling of being completely at another's mercy, of knowing that his life and the lives of his crew depended entirely on the whim of beings who would not even speak to him. That was what humanity wanted the galaxy to learn. Not that humans were dangerous, though they were. Not that humans were powerful, though they had become so. They wanted the galaxy to learn what it felt like to be silenced. And as the weeks passed and the human fleets maintained their positions, that lesson sank deeper and deeper into the minds of every species that had voted to cage humanity. They had thought themselves civilized. They had thought themselves wise. They had thought that condemning an entire species to imprisonment was the reasonable choice. Now they understood what they had really done. They had created the silence that would haunt them forever. On the 42nd day of the siege, Admiral finally decided to speak. The Concordat Council had been in continuous session for nearly a week. The 12 representatives of the elder species had debated and argued and proposed countless plans. Some wanted to fight, despite the overwhelming odds. Some wanted to flee, abandoning Concordat Prime to the humans. Most simply wanted the waiting to end, whatever that might mean. When the human shuttle began its descent toward the planet, the entire council fell silent. They watched the small vessel drop through the atmosphere with the intensity of prey watching a predator approach. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Whatever humanity wanted, they were finally about to learn. The shuttle landed in the plaza outside the grand chamber. Its doors opened, and a single human walked out. She was tall for her species, with dark skin and gray hair pulled back in a simple style. She wore no uniform, no weapons, no symbols of rank, just plain clothes and an expression that revealed nothing. Her name was Dr. Sarah. She was 112 years old, young by the standards of modern humanity, but her family history stretched back to the very beginning of the imprisonment. Her great-grandmother had been one of the scientists who first detected the containment field. Her grandmother had spent her life trying to break through it. Her mother had helped design the barrier breaker ships. Sarah had been chosen for this moment not because she was important, but because she was ordinary. She represented every human who had ever lived under the shadow of the barrier, every person who had been born into a cage they did not deserve. She walked into the grand chamber alone. The 12 council members watched her approach from their elevated seats. Guards lined the walls, but they knew their weapons would be useless. 500,000 ships waited in orbit, ready to respond to any threat against this single human. Sarah stopped in the center of the chamber and looked up at the beings who had condemned her species. "You imprisoned us," she said. Her voice was calm and clear, filling the space without any amplification. "You decided, based on our biology and our history, that we were too dangerous to exist freely. You locked us away to die slowly rather than quickly, and you never once asked what we might become if given the chance." The council members shifted uncomfortably. Some could not meet her gaze. "You have demonstrated our concerns were valid," the representative said, his voice weak. "Look what you have done. Look what you have become." Sarah smiled. It was not a warm expression. Those watching felt something cold touch their hearts. "We became exactly what you feared, but consider this carefully. We have 550,000 warships surrounding your capital. We could end your civilization in a single day. We could bombard this world until nothing remains but ash. We could do to you what you planned to do to us." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Instead, I am standing here talking." The representative leaned forward, all 4 arms gripping his seat. "What do you want? Tell us and we will give it to you. Anything, just name your price." Sarah shook her head slowly. "You still do not understand. We did not come for revenge. Revenge would be satisfying, but it would prove you right about us. It would show that we are nothing more than violent animals who destroy everything in our path." She began to walk slowly around the chamber, looking at each council member in turn. "We came for recognition. For 300 years, you treated us as less than people. You decided our fate without consulting us. You assumed that your ancient wisdom and advanced technology gave you the right to judge us." Sarah stopped and faced the council chair directly. "The Concordat is dissolved. As of this moment, it no longer exists. Your alliance of 12 species has ruled this galaxy for 50,000 years. That rule is now over." Several council members rose from their seats in shock. Guards moved forward, then stopped when they remembered the fleet waiting above. "You cannot do this," N said. "The Concordat maintains peace. It protects civilization. Without it, the galaxy will fall into chaos." "The Concordat maintains control," Sarah corrected. "It protects the power of species like yours who decided long ago that you knew best. And it made the decision to cage an entire species because you were afraid of what we might become." She turned to face all 12 representatives. "In place of the Concordat, there will be something new, the Terran Compact. Every species will be welcome to join, including yours, but membership will be earned, not inherited. And no species, no matter how old or powerful, will have the right to decide the fate of another." "And if we refuse?" the representative asked. Sarah looked at him with something that might have been pity. "I suggest you look at your sky and reconsider that question." She turned and began walking toward the exit. Her footsteps echoed in the silent chamber. The 12 most powerful beings in the galaxy watched her go, and none of them tried to stop her. At the door, Sarah paused and looked back. You will have 1 week to respond to our offer. If you choose to join the compact, you will be treated as equals. Your crimes against humanity will be recorded but not punished. We will build a new order together, one based on respect rather than fear. And if we do not join, the council chair asked, then you will be left alone. We will not destroy you. We will not conquer you. We will simply move on and build our new civilization without you. And you will spend the rest of your existence knowing that you could have been part of something better. She opened the door. 1 week, she repeated, choose wisely. Then she was gone. The shuttle lifted off an hour later. The council watched it rise through the atmosphere, a tiny speck against the darkness of space. It rejoined the human fleet, which had not moved a single ship during the entire encounter. 550,000 vessels, any one of which could have reduced cities to rubble, and humanity had sent a single unarmed woman to deliver their message. The council debated through the night. Some argued for resistance, for one final stand against the human threat, but most recognized the truth. Humanity had already won. The only question was what kind of victory it would be. By morning, the vote was unanimous. The Concordat of 12 officially dissolved itself and petitioned to join the Terran Compact. The news spread across the galaxy within hours. Species that had lived under Concordat rule for thousands of years learned that everything had changed. Some celebrated. Others feared what might come next. A few hoped that this new order might actually be better than the old. On the Defiance, Admiral received the report and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. It is done, she said quietly. After 300 years, it is finally done. Thomas stood beside her, watching the planet below. What happens now, Admiral? Considered the question. For her entire life, she had worked toward this moment. Every decision, every sacrifice, every sleepless night had been in service of this goal, and now it was achieved. Now, she said, we build. We show the galaxy what humanity can do when we are not fighting for survival. We prove that we are more than the predators they feared. She turned away from the viewport. We prove that we can be trusted with the power we have claimed. That is the real test. Anyone can destroy. Anyone can conquer. The hard part is knowing when to stop. Outside, the human fleet began to shift. Ships that had held position for 42 days started moving to new assignments. The siege of Concordat Prime was over. But the story of humanity in the galaxy was just beginning. 3 years had passed since the breaking of the barrier. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one had expected. Admiral Wei, now Fleet Marshal of the Terran Compact's combined forces, stood on a platform overlooking the Grand Plaza of Unity. The world had once been called Concordat Prime, but humanity had renamed it as a symbol of what they were trying to build. Behind her rose a monument of black stone and silver light. It was simple in design but powerful in meaning. A wall, 50 meters tall, with a gap torn through its center. Ships carved from stone poured through the gap, an eternal representation of the moment humanity broke free. Before her stood representatives of 40 species. Some had been members of the old Concordat. Others had been conquered by it, forced into submission by the same arrogance that had imprisoned humanity. Still, others had been quarantined like Earth, locked away in their own systems because the elder species considered them too dangerous. Those quarantined species had been freed in the first months after the breaking. Humanity had found 17 containment fields scattered across the galaxy, each one imprisoning a civilization that had been deemed unworthy of freedom. One by one, human ships had torn down those barriers and welcomed the prisoners into the Terran Compact. The gratitude of these species was beyond measure. They had given up hope, just as humanity almost had. They had resigned themselves to slow extinction. And then, impossibly, humans had appeared in their skis and set them free. Looked out at the assembled crowd. Humans and aliens stood side by side, united under a banner that had seemed impossible just 3 years ago. The Terran Compact was still young, still finding its way. But it worked. Against all odds, it actually worked. "We could have burned it all down," said, her voice carried by speakers across the plaza. "Many of us wanted to. 3 centuries of imprisonment, of being treated as animals too dangerous to be free. That breeds a certain kind of anger." She paused, remembering the rage that had burned in her chest when she first took command of the fleet. The desire to make the Concordat pay for every year of suffering, to show them exactly what they had created with their fear and arrogance. "But that would have made them right," she continued. "They called us predators. They said we were violent and dangerous and incapable of restraint. If we had responded to our freedom with destruction, we would have proven every accusation they made." Turned to look at the monument behind her. The carved ship seemed almost alive in the afternoon light. "We are descended from predators, this is true. Our ancestors hunted across the plains of Earth, chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. That history shaped us in ways we cannot escape. We are aggressive. We are territorial. We form tight groups and view outsiders with suspicion. We are capable of terrible violence." She faced the crowd again. "But we are also builders, dreamers. We form packs not just to hunt but to protect. We are dangerous, yes. But we choose what we are dangerous for. We choose who we protect and who we fight. And when the barrier fell, we chose to be dangerous in defense of something better than revenge." In the crowd, Dr. Sarah listened with tears in her eyes. She had delivered humanity's ultimatum to the Concordat Council. She had watched the old order crumble and helped build the new one. Now she stood among the representatives of dozens of species, all of whom owed their freedom to human stubbornness. "The galaxy feared what we might become," said. "Now they know. We became everything they were afraid of. 550,000 warships, the largest military force in galactic history, enough power to conquer every world in known space." She smiled. It was a warmer expression than she had worn 3 years ago. "And we used that power to offer them something they never offered us, a choice." The crowd stirred. Representatives from former Concordat species shifted uncomfortably. They remembered the fear of those first months, the silent human ships in orbit, the complete helplessness they had felt. "Every species in this compact chose to be here," continued. "Some joined quickly, recognizing that the old ways were over. Others needed time to understand what we were offering. A few still have not joined, and that is their right. We do not force membership. We do not demand submission. We simply offer partnership to anyone willing to accept it." She looked at the sky. Somewhere up there, human ships still patrolled the trade routes and guarded the borders. The fleet had been reduced from its wartime peak, but it remained the most powerful military force in existence. "Our ships still fly," said. "Our soldiers still stand ready. We have not forgotten how to fight. But we have also learned that winning a battle is easy compared to winning a peace. Destroying an enemy is simple. Building a future is hard." She stepped back from the podium and gestured to the monument. "This memorial stands where the Concordat once ruled. It reminds us of what we endured and what we overcame. But it also reminds us of what we chose not to become. We could have been conquerors. We could have been tyrants. We could have replaced one unjust order with another." Turned to face the crowd one final time. "Instead, we chose to be something else. Something that the galaxy has never seen before. A species that earned the right to rule and then refused to do so. A people who built the most powerful fleet in history and used it to offer a hand in friendship rather than a fist in anger." She paused, letting her words settle over the assembly. "The Concordat is gone. The Terran Compact has taken its place, and for as long as humanity has a voice in this galaxy, we will remember what it felt like to be silenced. We will remember, and we will make sure that no species ever suffers that fate again." The crowd erupted in applause. human voices mixed with alien sounds of approval. For a moment, the differences between species did not matter. They were united by a shared hope for a better future. Later that evening stood alone on a balcony overlooking the city. The ceremonies were over. The speeches had been given. Now she could finally rest. Sarah found her there, staring up at the stars. "You did well today," Sarah said. "The speech was perfect." Shook her head. "Words are easy. Actions are hard. We have promised the galaxy a new order. Now we have to deliver it." "You doubt we can?" Considered the question. 3 years ago, she would have said no without hesitation. Humanity could do anything. They had proven that by breaking the barrier and silencing the galaxy. Now she was less certain. Building was harder than destroying. Peace was harder than war. The compact was still fragile, held together by human power and the hope of something better. "I think we can," she said finally. "But it will take time. Generations, maybe. We have to prove ourselves every day. Show the galaxy that we meant what we said about choice and partnership." Sarah nodded. "Then we will prove ourselves. That is what humans do. We never stop trying." Smiled. It was true. For all their flaws, humans never gave up. They had spent 300 years in a cage, and they had emerged stronger than ever. They could spend another 300 years building the compact into something worthy of the sacrifice that had created it. In the void between stars, at the place where the containment field had once stood, a memorial beacon pulsed with a message in every known language. "We were quarantined for 300 years. We emerged with 550,000 ships and a single demand: to be given the chance to prove ourselves. We were dangerous. We were also patient. Remember both." The galaxy, which had once tried to silence humanity, now listened very carefully whenever Earth spoke. And humanity, which had every reason to hate and destroy, chose instead to build and protect. That was the true measure of their victory. Not the ships they had built or the barriers they had broken, not the power they had claimed or the enemies they had defeated. The true victory was the choice they had made: to be more than predators, to be more than conquerors, to be the guardians of a galaxy that had once tried to destroy them. And as the stars wheeled overhead, humanity continued to prove that the Concordat had been wrong about them all along. They were dangerous, but they were also so much more. They were human. And that was enough.